After Tuesday's win in Alberta, Jason Kenney joins the ranks of a growing number of Conservative premiers that were not part of the landscape in November 2015. Back then, a newly elected Liberal government found allies in other Liberal provinces. But fast forward to 2019 and things look a lot bluer. And some of those new faces share similar messages, from Doug Ford.
And tonight, we have sent a clear message to the world. Ontario is open for business.
To now Jason Kenney.
Today, our great province has sent a message to Canada and the world. Alberta is open for business.
They are joining forces and standing up to Ottawa. So what does this new landscape mean for Justin Trudeau? How about Andrew Scheer? And what's next for Jason Kenney? It's Thursday, and that means At Issue is here. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto. And Shachi Kurl joins us from Victoria tonight. Good to see everyone. So let's start with Tuesday's results in Alberta and what we think it means for the rest of the country. Chantal, why don't you start off?
Well, if the rest of the country did not expect Jason Kenney to win, then no one was paying attention for the past year and a half. I am wary to say that as Alberta goes, the country does not necessarily go, but that has been a fact of life. And not to throw any rain on tonight's parade, 4 years ago, almost to the day, we sat around similar tables, and Rachel Notley had just scored a historic win, and an election was coming federally, and that was supposed to mean great things for the NDP and Thomas Mulcair, because if Alberta would trust the NDP with its government, why would not other Canadians? And the rest is history.
So Andrew Scheer shouldn't be throwing a party yet, Andrew. Is that how we should take that?
Well, Chantal makes a very effective point that no one knows for sure. I suspect it's going to take a while to see exactly what this means. I suspect we may see a bit of a phony war over the next few months until the federal election is through with, because I'm not sure it suits either Liberals or the Alberta Conservatives to really ignite hostilities. I think partly because the Alberta Conservatives, Jason Kenney is a former federal cabinet minister. He's very plugged into the national party. He's very connected to the other provincial parties. So this is not Alberta going it alone. This is not Alberta versus the rest. There is an axis, if you will, connecting these different provinces, and they will be consulting very closely and I think coordinating their messages and their campaigns very closely. So as I say, I suspect we're going to have to wait and see exactly how this plays out in terms of, I don't think Jason Kenney is going to immediately launch some of these provocative measures he was talking about during the campaign. He may not do them ever. They may simply have been for show.
What do you think, Shachi? How does this bode for the rest of the country?
Well, it's going to be interesting because I think at first blush we're looking at Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, Brian Pallister, Doug Ford, this brick wall of opposition against Justin Trudeau. They all talk. They're all on the phone. As Andrew mentioned, they're coordinating their messages. But this also gives Justin Trudeau and the Liberals a lot of, call it ammo or material to work with in terms of furthering the cleavage that the Liberals are now trying to force between themselves and the Conservatives as they try to coalesce the left of center again, the way they did in 2015, by talking about, well, what kind of Canada do you want? What kind of Canada do you want to stand for? And that's a very resonant message, obviously not with the people who elected these Conservative governments at the provincial level, but with progressives, with young women, with urban voters. And so he'll have a lot to work with. The other side to this, too, is what if it works? What if Andrew Scheer actually gets elected? What if the Conservatives win the next election? Kenney, Ford, the rest of them, they all lose their elitist boogeyman in Ottawa, and then the real pressure is on them to deliver the things that they promised to their electorates without being able to blame it on the PM.
Well, I mean, that's always the downside or the flip side to these kinds of things. You know, Justin Trudeau finds himself, as you say, Shachi, against all these people. But on the other hand, Justin Trudeau finds himself against all these people, and that can be very helpful for him as well, can't it, Chantal?
Well, and you know, thinking about your map and the change in colors over the time that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister, that is a phenomenon that is cyclical, that we have seen happen every time there has been a change in Ottawa. If the map was so red it was because it was the end of the Harper era. He had to contend with Philippe Couillard in Quebec, a Liberal, and Kathleen Wynne in Ontario, another Liberal. Remember Jean Chrétien had to deal with Mike Harris and Lucien Bouchard. That is, one, not unusual, and two, usually not it's a policy problem for the Prime Minister of the day. It's not necessarily an electoral problem.
Well, you do have to giggle a little bit and think about, you know, this is welcome Justin Trudeau to Stephen Harper's nightmare. There's a reason he never wanted to talk to these people towards the end.
But he didn't towards the beginning either.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
Well, I wish it were otherwise, but I think it's worth noting that all of these parties campaigned against the carbon tax.
Yes.
So if we're being guided by evidence so far, and who knows exactly how much they played a role in their elections, but if we're guided by the evidence so far, that would say that this issue is not playing well to the Prime Minister's advantage. It is playing to the Conservatives' advantage. And if that's a precursor at all for the federal election, then that will be interesting to see.
Well, and
but that is not true in Quebec.
Yes.
Certainly not true in BC.
No.
And a majority of Ontarians did not vote for the Conservatives.
But I think the interesting thing about this issue is if you go back to the energy wars of the 1980s, it really was Alberta versus the rest. You did not have this alignment now. And I think this alignment has been building for some time between Ontario and the West. Ontario is increasingly looks west for its interests. It takes some of its political cues from the West. It doesn't look east the same way. It doesn't look towards Quebec the same way it might have in previous elections.
And that's because that's where the population is ascendant and where the economy is ascendant.
Exactly.
It is increasingly a Western.
And if you look at that election, we can look at 2015 or we can go back and look at 2011. What Stephen Harper showed was you can win an election now in this country with just the West and Ontario effectively. That will be a calculation everybody will be thinking about.
Just quickly, do you all take that as a message, though, that Canadians aren't into the carbon tax? Is that how you read that, or is that going too far? Shachi, do you want to start on that?
I would say that, you know, we noticed a real significant moving of the needle when in the carbon pricing formula, Justin Trudeau came out and said, by the way, we're going to rebate families directly to the household level. You get your money back. That's not what they're talking about. They've been off message for months now. They come back to talking about that. I think they're able to move the needle a little bit again. And remember, they need to win in the cities. Like Chantal said, they need to win in Quebec, Ontario, and BC, and they can make the case in places there.
Okay, I want to do one go round on the fact that from 2013 up until Tuesday, there had been a total of 6 premiers that were women in this country. And when the Prime Minister was elected, I believe there were 3 in place. I might get the numbers wrong there. But should we take anything from that? The fact that Rachel Notley didn't get a second term, that there are no women in these leadership positions in the country. I don't want to make too much out of it. I wonder, as a woman myself, what that's about, or whether that's something we should be concerned about it. Chantal?
I don't see it as a gender issue over the same period. I see it more as a trend towards governments becoming disposable more quickly. Yes, Pauline Marois in Quebec didn't get a second term, but then nor did Philippe Couillard. New Brunswick has just had 4 single-term governments in a row. So yes, they all came to the fore at a time when voters throw out governments more easily, even when the economy is good and they have a good, fiscal record to show for their time in government.
Andrew, do you think there's anything, and it doesn't have to be because it's a gender thing, but is it the fact that they are not there a gender thing, or is that of concern? If you take the view that maybe women do politics in a different way, does that, and you may not, but does that worry you at all?
Well, I was going to make exactly the same point that Chantal made, but I'll add to it. Yeah, I mean, obviously, historically and to this day, there are fewer women elected percentage-wise and fewer that reach the very top. And obviously, as a society, both for reasons of equality of opportunity and because women may bring different viewpoints and different experiences to it, that's something we want to work on as a society. I do want to note that if people are saying they were defeated because they were women, they also won, presumably that didn't help them, that Kathleen Wynne and Pauline Marois and Christy Clark and Rachel Notley all won elections as women. So I don't doubt there are some voters to this day who will vote against a candidate because they're a woman, but they don't seem to be a critical mass.
Chacha, what do you see when you look at that?
Well, yeah, people not voting for politicians because they're women are increasingly fewer and further between. Obviously, times have changed. What's concerning to me overall is just the lack of female participation in politics. When you look at the numbers of women around council tables at city and town halls or in provincial legislatures or in the Commons. And so, you know, I think we tend to look at the rise and fall of female politicians more carefully because there are simply fewer of them. When male politicians are turfed out of office, we don't say, oh, laws, you know, they were turfed out because they were men. It's just there's been more of them historically. I look forward to the day when you've got, you know, all women leaders running against each other, and then we don't have to have that conversation. That'll be great.
And we should say it's probably on balance a good thing that governments can't necessarily count on 2 terms, 3 terms in power, that they're a little bit more, have to pay a little bit more attention to the voters. That's probably on balance a good thing.
I'm going to ask Chantal the last question, and this is just the Jason Kenney reach out to the Quebec Premier François Legault that he did in French. That was not well received, I don't think. But how do you interpret that, given that there is no pipeline project for Quebec that has faded away completely? So how should we read that?
Well, Jason Kenney and Andrew Scheer keep talking about resuscitating a pipeline that would go through Quebec. That I don't think can happen unless they find some political support for it here, because TransCanada and others are not interested in getting into that battle. Now, Jason Kenney, speaking French, was maybe not well received, but the message it does send is this is a Premier of Alberta who can actually come to Quebec via television if need be, but speak to Quebecers in French, and as someone noted in a column today, without needing someone to translate this French into French. So that makes it a bit more efficient if you're going to plead a case directly to people, that you are able to do that, and Jason Kenney certainly is.
Okay, and we'll see where it goes from here. Before we go, though, be sure to subscribe to, thank you, everybody. I forgot to say thank you, at Issue the Podcast for extra content. This week, we're continuing this conversation about what's next for Alberta and the changing political landscape. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.